So I want you to picture a really crisp October afternoon back in 1964. We're in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C.
Right, a very affluent area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a woman has just been murdered on the nearby canal towpath, shot execution style in broad daylight.
Which is just, shocking for that neighborhood.
Completely. She's an artist, a prominent socialite, and as it happens, the former lover of the recently assassinated President John F. Kennedy.
Wow.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Before the local police even have a firm grasp on the crime scene, before the yellow tape is fully up, one of the most powerful men in the U.S. government is frantically tearing through her private art studio.
Just letting himself in.
Literally picking the locks. He's searching for a diary. And this man, he isn't a homicide detective. He's James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence for the CIA.
It's an image that really, it completely shatters our conventional understanding of how American history is supposed to operate.
It really does.
We're conditioned to believe in this neat, compartmentalized world. The government is over here, handling diplomacy and national defense, and the criminal underworld is over there, handling racketeering.
Right, they're supposed to be sworn enemies.
Exactly. But when you find the CIA's top spy hunting for a dead woman's diary in a local domestic murder case...
You realize those compartments are a total illusion.
Yeah, they just don't exist.
And that is exactly what this deep dive is about today. We are tracing a single, sprawling 45-year pipeline.
It's basically a piece of shadow machinery that completely blurred the line between the state and the syndicate.
We're going to connect the bootleggers of 1920s Prohibition, the neon-soaked casinos of 1950s Havana, secretive offshore Caribbean banks, and a global intelligence slush fund.
And crucially, we really have to examine the human cost of that machinery, right?
Yes, absolutely.
By looking at the historical investigations, the financial autopsies of these global banks, and the heavily scrutinized case files of the 1960s, we're going to see what happened to the women who got caught in the gears.
Women like Marilyn Monroe, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and the legendary investigative journalist Dorothy Kilgallen.
Because you might think of organized crime, Cold War espionage, and celebrity scandals as, entirely separate sections of the newspaper.
But by the end of our time today, you're going to see how they were all utilizing and honestly being consumed by the exact same system.
Right. And to understand how a spy chief ends up looking for a diary, we have to understand how the CIA and the mafia got into bed together in the first place.
So for that, we really have to go back to the 1920s and 30s. We have to look at the birth of the modern syndicate.
Yeah, because if we look at the criminal landscape prior to the 1930s, the American Mafia was not the corporate streamlined entity we picture today.
No, it's super fractured, right?
Highly fractured. The old guard leaders, they were often referred to as mustache Petes. They were deeply steeped in the insular traditions of the Sicilian honored society.
Like very localized, very old school.
Exactly. They operated on incredibly strict old country codes of blood and vendetta. And they categorically refused to do business with anyone outside of their specific ethnic enclaves.
So they were content just running neighborhood protection rackets, maybe some bootleg liquor when Prohibition hit.
Right. But they were constantly fighting each other. It was incredibly chaotic.
I mean, you had bodies dropping in the streets over minor turf disputes that originated in, villages back in Italy 40 years prior.
Yeah, and that chaos really culminated in the Castellamarese War of 1930 and 1931.
Which was just a total bloodbath, right?
A brutal, year-long bloodbath on the streets of New York between two major factions. Dozens of gangsters were killed.
But out of that incredible violence, a younger, much more pragmatic generation of mobsters kind of saw an opportunity.
They did. They looked at the piles of bodies and realized that this old world vendetta system was just utterly terrible for the bottom line.
Right. And this is where Charles Lucky Luciano steps onto the stage.
He's such a pivotal figure.
I always look at Luciano not just as a mobster, but as this ruthless, aggressive management consultant.
That's a great way to put it, actually.
He looks at this violent, failing startup, and he basically orchestrates a hostile takeover. He engineers the assassination of the two main warring bosses, and then he just calls a meeting.
He fundamentally restructured the underworld. Luciano proposed a nationwide criminal syndicate.
He established the commission, right?
Exactly. Which was essentially a board of directors for organized crime. It was made up of the heads of the major families.
So they would establish territorial boundaries, mediate disputes diplomatically.
And most importantly, any internal killings had to be formally voted on and approved by the board.
He brought corporate governance to murder and extortion. It's wild.
It is. But Luciano's biggest innovation, the thing that really set the stage for the next half-century, was that he broke the ethnic barrier.
Okay, how so?
He formally allied the Italian mafia with the powerful Jewish syndicates, most notably a man who would become the financial architect of the underworld, Meyer Lansky.
Ah, Meyer Lansky. He's the linchpin of this entire history, really.
He really is. Lansky was a brilliant mathematician and a complete master of logistics.
Because while the old guard cared about honor and territory, Lansky and Luciano, they just cared about capital.
And Prohibition had handed them more capital than any criminal enterprise in history.
They weren't just running a few speakeasies. They were importing millions of gallons of liquor.
Right, which required fleets of specialized long-range boats. It required controlling the maritime smuggling routes.
And, crucially, it required absolute iron-fisted control over the New York docks and the longshoremen's unions.
Exactly. So they have the money, they have the corporate structure, and they control the ports.
Now, here is where the story takes a massive pivot from the underworld into the overworld.
Right, because it's 1941, the United States enters World War II.
And suddenly, the U.S. Navy has a massive problem on its hands right in New York Harbor.
The threat of German sabotage was a huge, paramount concern for the government.
Because the U.S. was trying to supply the Allied war effort across the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, and New York was the primary artery for that material. But U-boats were sinking merchant ships right off the eastern seaboard.
Naval intelligence was just terrified that German spies or sympathizers were infiltrating the docks, gathering shipping schedules, and sabotaging vessels.
And I know there was a massive incident in early 1942, the SS Normandy.
Oh, right, the luxury liner.
Yeah, it was this gorgeous French luxury liner that the U.S. was converting into a troop ship, and it mysteriously caught fire and capsized right there at Pier 88 in Manhattan.
The official ruling was that a spark from a worker's blowtorch ignited some highly flammable life preservers, causing an accidental fire.
But in the paranoid atmosphere of 1942, naval intelligence assumed it was enemy sabotage.
So they were desperate. They needed absolute security and a total flow of information from the docks.
But the U.S. military didn't control the docks. The longshoremen did, and the mob controlled the longshoremen.
Okay, let me stop you right here, because this is where the logic seems to just break down for me.
How so?
You have the Office of Naval Intelligence, backed by the entire apparatus of the United States military. Why do they need guys who break kneecaps for a living?
That's a fair question.
Couldn't the military just declare martial law on the docks and put a soldier every 10 feet?
In theory, yes. But practically, running a massive maritime port is an incredibly complex logistical ballet.
Okay.
If you bring in the military and impose martial law, the dock workers go on strike, the unions shut down the port, and the supply chain to Europe completely collapses.
I see.
The military realized they couldn't forcefully occupy the docks without crippling the war effort. They needed the organic, entrenched power structure that already governed the waterfront.
They needed the Syndicate.
Exactly.
So the patrician, Ivy League elites running naval intelligence and the OSS, which, by the way, was the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, they actually hold their noses and go to the mafia. They initiate what becomes known as Operation Underworld.
They approach Meyer Lansky. They explain the problem.
And what does Lansky say?
Lansky tells them that if they want absolute control of the docks, there is only one man who can give the order. And he is currently sitting in a maximum security prison in Dannemora.
Lucky Luciano.
That man is Lucky Luciano.
It is stunning. The government basically hires the fox to guard the henhouse.
They really did. They moved Luciano to a much more comfortable prison closer to New York City so he can hold court.
He puts the word out to the waterfront capos, guys like Albert Anastasia, and overnight the docks are locked down.
The intelligence flow was immediate. Any suspicious activity, any stranger asking questions about shipping schedules was immediately reported.
Or dealt with brutally by the mob.
Exactly. But the implications of Operation Underworld stretch far beyond World War II. It fundamentally altered the psychology of both the intelligence community and the criminal syndicate.
Right, because for the mafia, this isn't just a lucrative side gig. This is validation.
Complete validation.
Luciano and Lansky realize they possess an operational capability that the state desperately needs, but cannot legally or politically execute itself.
And for the first time, the security bureaucracy realized the sheer utility of organized crime.
Because the mob doesn't have to follow due process.
Right, they don't have congressional oversight, and they are incredibly efficient at logistics and enforcement. It birthed this dark, symbiotic relationship.
But of course, the war ends. The OSS and naval intelligence, they don't need Luciano running counterespionage anymore.
No, they don't. And by the way, Luciano's reward for this patriotism was having his sentence commuted and being deported to Italy.
Wow. But Meyer Lansky and the commission are still sitting in America with mountains of capital.
Yeah, prohibition is long over. The war is over. They need a new frontier.
They need a massive, legitimate-seeming enterprise to wash their money and multiply their fortunes.
And they find it just 90 miles south of Florida. Welcome to Cuba in the early 1950s.
Now, I want to really paint a picture of what Havana was like before Meyer Lansky truly got his hands on it.
It was a very different scene.
In the early 50s, Cuba was already a popular tourist destination for wealthy Americans. But the gambling scene was basically a lawless frontier.
It was completely unregulated. It was entirely predatory.
How bad are we talking?
Well, the Cuban nightclub owners would essentially lease out corners of their rooms or even just individual tables to independent operators who had a bankroll.
So there was no overarching authority ensuring fair play.
None. These were what were known in the trade as bust-out joints.
I read about the specific games they ran, these incredible come-on scams called Cubalo or Razzle-Dazzle.
Yeah.
Razzle-Dazzle just sounds like a magic trick where you end up without your wallet.
That's essentially what it was. It was a carnival scam adapted for the casino floor.
How did it work?
It involved throwing dice from a cup and tracking points on a confusing board. The dealers would approach American tourists while they were literally sitting at their dinner tables.
Just eating dinner.
Yeah, offering them a chance to double a $5 bill in seconds.
Oh, wow.
The game was designed to let the mark win early, hook them, and then use a mathematically impossible scoring system to drain their entire bankroll.
And the dealers were manipulating this.
Oh, absolutely. Fast counting or misreading the dice.
It was so blatant that in March 1953, the Saturday Evening Post ran a massive, multi-page expose.
I remember that.
The headline was, "Suckers in Paradise, How Americans Lose Their Shirts in Caribbean Gambling Joints."
Very catchy title.
The reporter, Lester Veely, went down there and found that virtually every spot in Havana was rigging the games.
He noted that dealers were dealing blackjack from handheld packs.
Which, if you know anything about casino security, holding the deck in your hand makes it trivially easy for a trained mechanic to deal from the bottom or manipulate the cards.
Right. Veely's reporting noted that there were practically only two places in all of Havana where you could get an honest gamble.
And what were they?
One was the Louse Ring, which was a dirty, low-stakes betting area under the grandstand at the Oriental Park horse track where the locals played for pennies.
Okay. And the other?
The other was the luxurious Montmartre Club. And the reason the games at the Montmartre were honest was because Meyer Lansky had recently taken over the operation.
This is one of my favorite historical ironies.
It's so funny.
Meyer Lansky, the financial mastermind of the American underworld, the guy who helped build the National Syndicate. He steps into Havana, and he is absolutely appalled.
But he's not angry that people are breaking the law.
No, he is furious because they are running bad, sloppy games.
He was offended as a businessman.
Exactly. I've always thought of Lansky in Cuba less like a ruthless mobster and more like a regional franchise inspector for McDonald's.
That is a remarkably accurate way to look at it, yeah.
He shows up in Havana, tastes the fries, realizes the local operators are using rancid oil and serving cold burgers, and he knows they are going to completely destroy the global brand.
Lansky understood a fundamental truth about casino capitalism. Real, sustainable, generational wealth is not made by scamming a tourist out of $50 at a rigged dice game.
It's made by the mathematical certainty of the house edge.
Precisely. If you provide a luxurious, safe, and impeccably honest environment, high rollers will come.
They will drink your free champagne, they will feel completely secure, and they will willingly risk hundreds of thousands of dollars.
The math guarantees the house will win in the long run. But the moment a high roller feels cheated, they never come back.
And this rigorous corporate philosophy of Lansky's perfectly aligned with the ambitions of the man who had just taken control of the country, Fulgencio Batista.
Batista's a crucial figure here. He had been president of Cuba before, left for Florida after losing an election, and then seized power again in a military coup in 1952.
So he's back in charge.
Yes. Batista looked at the post-war economic boom in America. He saw the rise of commercial airline travel, and he realized Cuba could become the premier tourism empire in the hemisphere.
But he knew the rampant, predatory gambling corruption exposed by the American press was killing the golden goose.
So in a move that beautifully mirrors the OSS hiring Luciano to secure the docks, the dictator of Cuba officially hires Meyer Lansky to become his advisor on gambling reform.
Batista essentially deputized Lansky to police the fairground.
And Lansky brought Las Vegas standards to the Caribbean.
What did that actually look like on the floor?
He mandated that all blackjack had to be dealt from a transparent box, a shoe resting on the table. No more handheld decks.
Makes sense.
He introduced ladder men, casino supervisors, who literally sat on elevated chairs above the floor to watch the dealers and the players, spotting any sharp practices.
And he personally visited the owners of competing casinos, right? Guys like Norman Rothman at the Sans Souci.
He did, and he delivered a very clear ultimatum. You run clean, or you don't operate at all.
And Lansky had the backing of the state to enforce it.
He sure did. Right after that Saturday Evening Post article dropped, the Cuban military intelligence swept into the casinos, arrested over a dozen American card sharps and grifters, and physically deported them.
Lansky cleans up the industry, and in return, Batista gives Lansky the keys to the kingdom. We really need to talk about Hotel Law 2074.
Law 2074. Promulgated in 1955, it was a masterpiece of state-sponsored crony capitalism.
How did it work?
It declared that anyone who built a hotel in Cuba with an investment of over $1 million or a nightclub valued at over $200,000 was automatically entitled to apply for a casino license.
Okay, so it sets a financial bar.
Yes. Furthermore, the Cuban government would waive all customs duties on imported construction materials and casino equipment.
That's a huge tax break.
And perhaps most importantly, the government announced it would provide matching funds and direct financial loans to assist with the construction.
Wait, let's make sure you, the listener, understand the gravity of this. The sovereign government of Cuba is using its own national treasury to bankroll the construction of casinos for the American mafia.
Precisely. And in return, Lansky ensured that Batista, his relatives, and his political allies received incredibly lucrative private kickbacks.
Right. They were given construction contracts, no-show jobs, and hidden ownership shares in these massive resorts.
This is a perfect system for them.
Now, I want to pause here because this is the critical mechanism of the entire story. We always talk about money laundering, but we rarely explain how it actually works.
It's important to understand the mechanics.
Right. How does a massive casino in Havana take millions of dollars of dirty money from narcotics or loan sharking in Chicago and make it clean? Walk us through the actual physical mechanics of the casino wash.
Let's do a hypothetical. Imagine an organized crime family in New York has generated $500,000 in cash from illicit activities, narcotics, extortion, whatever it may be.
Okay, got it.
They cannot just deposit a duffel bag of small bills into a Chase Manhattan bank in New York. The IRS will immediately ask where it came from.
Right, it's dirty paper. It's a massive liability.
Exactly. So a courier literally flies that cash down to Havana. There are no strict currency controls at the border.
So they just walk it in.
The courier walks into a mob-owned casino, let's say the Montmartre. They go to the cashier's cage and exchange that $500,000 in dirty street cash for casino chips.
Now, they don't just turn around and cash out immediately, right? Because that would look suspicious, even to the lax Cuban regulator.
Right, you have to put on a show. The courier, or a designated associate, goes to the baccarat tables or the roulette wheel. They play for a few hours.
They might lose $10,000 or $20,000 to the houseage.
Which the mob considers simply a cost of doing business, a laundering fee.
Right.
At the end of the night, they take their remaining $480,000 in chips back to the cage. But this time, they don't ask for cash.
What do they ask for?
They ask the casino to issue them a certified cashier's check. Or they ask the casino to wire the money directly to a bank account in the United States.
And boom, the alchemy is complete.
When the IRS looks at that money arriving in New York, it comes with a perfectly legal paper trail.
The documentation says, gambling winnings from a licensed state-sanctioned casino in the Republic of Cuba.
It is clean, taxable income. It is completely insulated by the sovereignty of the Cuban government.
Because the American authorities have no jurisdiction to audit the cage at a Havana casino to see if the initial cash deposit was legitimate.
None at all. It is brilliant.
It isn't just a casino, it is a sovereign financial washing machine. And this system reaches its absolute zenith in December 1957 with the opening of Lansky's crown jewel, the Havana Riviera.
The Riviera was just a staggering achievement. It cost $14 million to build.
Which is a massive amount of money back then.
Huge. It was a 21-story skyscraper right on the Malecon, overlooking the ocean. It was the largest purpose-built casino hotel in the world outside of Las Vegas.
The architecture was straight out of a James Bond fever dream.
Oh, absolutely.
It was clad in these shimmering turquoise mosaics to reflect the colors of the Florida Straits. It was the first building in Havana to have central air conditioning.
And the casino itself wasn't just a room. It was a massive windowless gold mosaic dome attached to the side of the hotel.
I read it looked like a giant gilded ostrich egg.
That's a great description. And inside, the walls were padded. The sound of the outside world was completely deadened.
It was designed to keep players inside, completely detached from the time of day or the reality of the poverty just blocks away in Havana.
And you know the most fascinating bureaucratic detail of the Havana Riviera?
What's that?
On the official corporate paperwork for tax and licensing purposes, Meyer Lansky, the undisputed financial architect of the American Syndicate, was listed merely as the kitchen manager.
The kitchen manager. It's the pinnacle of his life's work. The mob finally has its own country.
But as we know, the music stops abruptly.
Right. On New Year's Eve, 1958, Fulgencio Batista flees the country. Fidel Castro and his revolutionary forces march into Havana.
And the very first thing the revolutionaries do is march into the casinos, smash the slot machines, and shut the gambling empire down.
Lansky and the mob lose hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure overnight.
You would think that this catastrophic loss in Cuba would be the end of the mob's geopolitical influence.
But this is where the story mutates into something exponentially darker.
Yeah, it really does.
The golden era of Havana was over. But the financial architecture that Lansky had perfected, this precise mechanism of using offshore sovereignty to move vast sums of dark money outside the reach of the IRS and the FBI, that architecture didn't die.
No, it was simply adopted by a new client,
The very people who had partnered with the mob during World War II.
the intelligence community.
Let's trace this next era. We are looking at a verifiable 45-year offshore pipeline.
Right? A direct lineage from Meyer Lansky's Cuban casinos through an intelligence officer named Paul Helliwell into Castle Bank in the Bahamas, and eventually evolving into the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI.
Let's start with the linchpin of this transition. Who is Paul Helliwell?
Paul Helliwell is one of the most consequential yet least known figures of the 20th century.
What's his background?
During World War II, he was the chief of special intelligence in China for the OSS. After the war, he transitioned into the newly formed CIA.
Okay, so deep intelligence ties.
Very deep. But Helliwell also operated deeply in the private sector as an attorney and a financier in Miami. Historians have pointed out that Helliwell was the human bridge between the intelligence world, organized crime, and global speculative finance.
So Castro kicks the mob and the CIA out of Cuba. Both groups have a massive problem.
The mob needs a new place to watch their narcotics and racketeering money.
And the CIA needs an untraceable way to fund highly illegal, off-the-books, covert operations around the world, like arming anti-Castro rebels.
Exactly. Congress allocates a budget to the CIA, but that money is tracked. If the CIA wants to fund a proxy war, or pay off a foreign dictator, or run an assassination program, they cannot use traceable taxpayer dollars.
They need black money.
They need a laundry just as badly as the mob does.
And Paul Helliwell realizes he can build a single laundromat that services both clients.
He looks at what Lansky did in Cuba, and he decides to formalize it in the Bahamas. He establishes Castle Bank and Trust in Nassau.
So Castle Bank was not a traditional retail bank.
No, it was an offshore haven designed specifically for absolute secrecy. On paper, it was handling the wealth of rich Americans dodging taxes.
But in reality,
Castle Bank was laundering massive sums of money for both the major organized crime syndicates and the Central Intelligence Agency.
that's just wild.
The mob would deposit their dirty street cash, and the CIA would deposit their black budget funds, often generated from their own illicit activities.
Including, like, facilitating global narcotics trafficking in Southeast Asia, right?
Yes, the bank washed the money and moved it globally.
It is genuinely staggering to say out loud. The Central Intelligence Agency and the American Mafia are literally sharing the same offshore bank.
They really were.
But what happens when the actual law enforcement agencies of the United States stumble onto this? I want to talk about Operation Tradewinds.
Operation Tradewinds was a massive investigation launched by the IRS and the Department of Justice in the late 1960s and early 70s.
Because the IRS knew wealthy Americans were hiding money in the Bahamas.
Right. They managed to cultivate an informant who worked at Castle Bank.
And this next part is straight out of a movie.
It really is. In a scene straight out of a spy novel, this informant briefly left a briefcase full of the bank's most sensitive client ledgers unattended in a Miami apartment.
And the IRS was ready.
IRS agents swooped in, photographed the ledger, and discovered a massive systemic tax evasion and money laundering operation.
Investigators involved later said that if they had been allowed to prosecute, Castle Bank would have been the single largest tax evasion case in the history of the United States.
They had the ledgers. They had the mobsters dead to rights.
So what happened?
The investigation was completely shut down.
Hold on, let me get this straight. You have the IRS and the Department of Justice, the highest law enforcement body in the land, holding the smoking gun on a massive criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
Are you telling me an intelligence agency has the legal authority to just walk into the DOJ, flip the switch, and turn off a criminal investigation?
Not explicitly in the law books, no, but practically, yes.
How did they pull that off?
According to extensive investigative reporting later published in the Washington Post, the CIA went directly to the Justice Department. They invoked the ultimate trump card, national security.
Ah, of course.
The CIA argued that if the DOJ dragged Castle Bank into open court and those ledgers became public record, it wouldn't just expose mobsters, it would expose the funding mechanisms for active, highly classified CIA operations in Latin America and Asia.
It would burn deep cover operatives.
Exactly. Faced with the threat of jeopardizing national security, the Justice Department folded. The probe was quashed.
So the intelligence apparatus actively shielded a mafia money laundering hub from domestic law enforcement.
And Castle Bank was just the prototype. Because by the 1970s and 80s, this concept goes global. We moved from the Bahamas to BCCI.
The Bank of Credit and Commerce International, founded in 1972 by a Pakistani financier named Aga Hassan Abedi.
If Castle Bank was a boutique operation, BCCI was a global empire.
Abedi registered the bank in Luxembourg, right?
Yes, a jurisdiction specifically chosen because its banking regulations were incredibly opaque and compartmentalized.
And the timing is crucial. BCCI is established right as the global narcotics trade is exploding, particularly out of the Golden Crescent.
Yes, for those unfamiliar, the Golden Crescent refers to the principal area of illicit opium production in Asia, spanning the mountainous peripheries of Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan.
It generates billions of dollars in illegal cash.
And BCCI headquartered its operational center in Karachi, Pakistan, perfectly positioned to absorb this immense flow of dark capital.
And it wasn't just drug cartels using it. BCCI grew to have 400 branches in 78 countries. They even secretly and illegally bought controlling shares in major American banks in Washington, D.C.
It was massive.
So who are the clients of this global laundry?
It was a rogues gallery of the late 20th century. Financial investigators and later congressional probes revealed that BCCI was handling the personal fortunes of Saddam Hussein.
Wow.
They were laundering hundreds of millions for Manuel Noriega in Panama. They were the bank of choice for the Medellin drug cartel in Colombia, and they were moving money for various international terrorist organizations.
And right in the middle of this absolute swamp of global villainy is the CIA.
Deeply embedded. Congressional investigations later show that William Casey, the director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan, held off the books meetings with Abedi and utilized BCCI extensively.
Because BCCI was a global transnational entity, it was the perfect vehicle for the CIA to fund the Iran-Contra affair.
They used the bank to illegally funnel proceeds from secret arms sales to Iran directly to the right-wing Contra rebels in Nicaragua.
A maneuver explicitly banned by the U.S. Congress.
Exactly.
They bypassed the democratic oversight of their own country by using a bank that also serviced Saddam Hussein.
It represents the full realization of what political scientists and historians call the tripartite state.
I want to break that term down because tripartite state sounds like a dense academic theory, but the reality of it is visceral. How should we visualize this?
Think of it like a massive iceberg.
Okay, an iceberg.
The visible tip of the iceberg, the part that sits above the water and that everyone sees, is the overt state. That is the White House, Congress, the public courts, the speeches, the elections. It is the democratic process we were taught in school.
Right, the clean textbook history.
Exactly. But just below the waterline is the security state. The intelligence agencies, the black budgets, the military-industrial complex. They operate in secrecy, ostensibly to protect the overt state.
Okay, and what's the third part?
Beneath them both, forming the massive hidden base of the entire structure, is the underworld, the syndicates, the offshore banks, the narcotics cartels.
And the theory argues they aren't separate.
No, they rely on each other. Okay. The security state uses the underworld's logistics and dark money to run operations that the overt state would never legally permit. And in return, the security state protects the underworld from the overt state's law enforcement.
It is a terrifying ecosystem. So we have spent all this time building the machine. We've seen how the mob and the CIA merged their financial infrastructure.
And how they shared a common enemy in Fidel Castro, who kicked them out of their Cuban paradise.
But machines require maintenance. They require absolute secrecy to survive. How did this massive illegal apparatus deal with internal leaks?
That's the real question.
What happens when the shadow machinery intersects with the highly visible, incredibly glamorous world of domestic American politics, specifically the Kennedy administration?
This is where we transition from global geopolitics to domestic tragedies.
Yeah.
When you look at the historical timeline of the early 1960s, you see the massive intelligence apparatus operating just below the surface, desperately trying to eliminate Castro and manage the Cold War.
And right above it, you have the world of Camelot.
And when those worlds collided, the collateral damage was profound. The historical record groups together three incredibly influential women whose proximity to these secrets proved fatal. Let's start with the most famous, Marilyn Monroe.
It is so easy for the general public to write off Marilyn Monroe's death as a tragedy of Hollywood, a troubled star crushed by fame who finally took too many pills. That is the cultural narrative.
And we must acknowledge that the official record supports that narrative.
Right.
Marilyn Monroe died on the night of August 4th, 1962, at the age of 36. The official cause of death, determined by the Los Angeles County coroner, was acute barbiturate poisoning, specifically lethal levels of nembutyl and chloral hydrate.
And the coroner officially ruled it a probable suicide.
Yes. She had a heavily documented history of severe depression, mood instability, and there had been prior incidents where she had overdosed and had to be rescued.
So it fit a pattern.
The original 1962 inquest interviewed her psychiatrists and her internal medicine doctors, and they concluded that the pattern fit a suicide, or at least a tragic accidental overdose.
But the speculation never stopped.
No. In fact, 20 years later, in 1982, public pressure regarding conspiracy theories became so intense that the LA District Attorney ordered a formal threshold inquiry.
Led by Assistant DA Ronald Carroll, right?
Correct. He reviewed the original evidence and the subsequent claims, and he concluded there was no credible evidence to support a murder theory.
What was his reasoning?
The report stated that executing a murder via forced overdose and covering it up would have required a massive, virtually implausible conspiracy involving her doctors, the first responding police officers, the coroner, and the housekeeper.
So why does the murder theory endure? It's not just because fans can't let go. It's because of the glaring anomalies at the crime scene, and more importantly, it's about the secrets she was allegedly keeping.
The physical anomalies have been debated by forensic pathologists for decades. Chief among them was the state of her digestive tract.
Which was empty, right?
Exactly. Despite the massive amount of capsules she supposedly ingested to reach the lethal toxicity levels found in her liver and blood, the autopsy report noted that her stomach was totally empty.
No pill residue, no colored dye from the capsules.
None. This led to theories that the drugs were administered intravenously or via a suppository by someone else, either to incapacitate or kill her.
But the motive for murder is anchored entirely in her relationships with the Kennedy brothers. She had rumored highly sensitive affairs with President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy.
The theory posits that she wasn't just a jilted lover, she was a massive political liability.
Because of the Red Book?
Yes. The core of the Monroe conspiracy revolves around a missing object. Her Red Book, a diary. According to various friends and associates, Monroe kept a diary detailing her conversations with the Kennedys.
And the theory suggests this diary contained pillow talk, highly classified secrets regarding the administration's attempts to use the mafia to kill Castro, or plans regarding nuclear testing.
The idea is that she became erratic, threatened to hold a press conference to expose the affairs and the secrets, and the machine, whether it was the mob or rogue intelligence elements protecting the Kennedys, stepped in to silence her.
Now, it's important to state that the 1982 DA review noted that no such diary was ever recovered by police, and they dismissed its existence as rumor.
Right. Officially, it doesn't exist.
But the concept of the missing diary is what links Monroe to our next case, because you can dismiss Marilyn Monroe's Red Book as Hollywood tabloid gossip.
But when we move forward 2 years to October 1964, we encounter a case where the diary was absolutely real, the affairs were documented, and the intelligence community's involvement in the cover-up is undeniable.
We return to the towpath in Georgetown. We return to Mary Pinchot Meyer.
Mary Pinchot Meyer is the case that strips the plausible deniability away.
She was not a Hollywood actress looking for attention. She was born into American aristocracy. She went to Vassar. She was deeply embedded in the elite, progressive Washington social set.
And crucially, she was the ex-wife of Meyer.
And Meyer was not just a low-level employee, he was a very high-ranking CIA official, heavily involved in running covert propaganda operations during the Cold War.
And from roughly 1961 to 1963, while she is divorced from this CIA official, Mary Pinchot Meyer engages in a confirmed, intense romantic affair with President Kennedy.
She wasn't a one-night stand. White House logs and letters confirm she visited him constantly. She was considered a confidant.
She was exploring the early psychedelics movement with Timothy Leary, and there are credible theories she was actively trying to influence JFK to abandon Cold War militarism and pursue peace with the Soviets.
She was a woman of immense intellect, possessing the highest level of access imaginable. And on October 12, 1964, nearly a year after JFK's assassination, she goes for her daily afternoon walk on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath.
In broad daylight.
In broad daylight, a man approaches her, there is a brief struggle, and he shoots her. Once in the temple and once in the back, directly into the heart.
The medical examiner explicitly described the wounds as execution style. It was close range, precise, and immediately lethal.
The police response was swift but chaotic. Within minutes, they arrested a black man named Ray Crump Jr., who was found wandering in the vicinity.
His clothes were wet. He claimed he had fallen in the river while fishing, but he had no fishing gear. The police were convinced they had their man.
But I don't buy the random mugging narrative for a second, and clearly the jury didn't either. At Crump's trial in 1965, the prosecution's case completely fell apart.
The police dragged the canal, but they never found the murder weapon. There was no blood on Crump's clothes, despite the close-range nature of the shooting.
He was a small man, and witnesses described the shooter as much larger. The jury acquitted him. The murder remains officially unsolved to this day.
Even her ex-husband, Meyer, the CIA official, later wrote in his memoirs that he believed it was simply a tragic, sexually motivated assault by a stranger.
But the sheer precision of the killing, combined with the lack of forensic evidence tying Crump to the scene, leaves massive doubts.
But the murder isn't the most damning part of this story. It's the immediate aftermath. It's the scene you described at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Mary Pinchot Meyer kept a diary. She meticulously documented her affair with the president, her thoughts on his assassination, and her insights into Washington politics.
When news of her death broke, there was a frantic, almost panicked race to secure that diary. Her sister, Toni Bradley, and her brother-in-law, Ben Bradley, who was a very prominent journalist and close friend of JFK, went to Mary's studio to look for it.
And who's already there, allegedly picking the lock? James Jesus Angleton, the chief of counterintelligence for the CIA. A man whose entire career was built on paranoia, wiretaps, and uncovering moles.
Angleton was a legendary figure in the intelligence community. His presence at a domestic murder scene is staggering.
According to the memoirs of those involved, the diary was eventually located.
But instead of handing this vital piece of evidence over to the D.C. homicide detectives investigating her murder, Ben Bradley hands it to James Jesus Angleton.
Angleton took the diary to CIA headquarters, and it was subsequently destroyed.
Let me make sure you, the listener, fully grasp this. The head of CIA counterintelligence personally confiscates and destroys evidence in the active domestic homicide investigation of the president's former lover.
You cannot script a more blatant obstruction of justice. Why?
If you look back at our tripartite state analogy, Mary Pinchot Meyer represented an existential threat to the security state. She was deeply skeptical of the official narrative regarding JFK's assassination.
She knew the players.
She knew the secrets of the overt state, and she was married into the security state. The machinery intervened to protect itself. When the stakes involve the survival of the intelligence apparatus, local homicide detectives are simply bypassed as if they don't exist.
So we have Monroe, the overdose with the missing red book. We have Meyer, the point-blank execution with the CIA destroying her diary. But there was a third woman.
And she is perhaps the most tragic because she didn't just have passive knowledge. She wasn't just a confidant.
She was a professional investigator actively hunting the truth, and she had a massive national platform to broadcast it.
Dorothy Kilgallen.
Now, if people today remember Dorothy Kilgallen at all, they probably picture her as the witty, glamorous panelist in an evening gown on the television game show What's My Line?
But that is such a disservice to her legacy. She was one of the most famous syndicated newspaper columnists in America. She was a relentless, fearless investigative reporter.
She was absolutely not a fringe theorist working in a basement. Kilgallen was incredibly well networked.
She moved easily through New York high society Hollywood celebrity circles, and she had deep contacts within the intelligence and law enforcement communities. She had incredible instincts for recognizing when power was colluding.
Historians point out a massive detail that is often overlooked. As early as July 1959, Dorothy Kilgallen became the very first journalist to suggest in print that the CIA and the Mafia were working together to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Which we now know, through declassified documents, was absolutely true.
Right. The CIA had hired Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli to poison Castro.
But in 1959, exposing that alliance was explosive. She infuriated J. Edgar Hoover, and the FBI immediately opened a massive dossier on her.
She understood the underworld. She didn't just look at the wreckage. She had covered mob trials for 20 years.
She knew how the Syndicate operated. She knew what a mafia hit looked like. She knew what a patsy looked like.
So fast forward to November 1963. President Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas. They arrest Lee Harvey Oswald. And then, 2 days later, a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby walks into the basement of the Dallas police headquarters and shoots Oswald dead on live television.
The government immediately pushes the narrative that Ruby was just a grieving, patriotic citizen acting alone.
Kilgallen didn't buy that narrative for a single second.
Because she recognized exactly what it was. It was a silencing operation. She shifted her entire investigative focus onto Jack Ruby.
She recognized his deep connections to the mob, specifically to the exact syndicate networks we've been discussing, the Chicago outfit and the Lansky Trafficon operations.
She used her syndicated column to mock the official story. She wrote, and I quote her directly, "The case is closed, is it? Well, I'd like to know how, in a big, smart town like Dallas, a man like Jack Ruby, owner of a striptease honky-tonk, can stroll in and out of police headquarters as if it was at a health club at a time when a small army of law enforcers is keeping a tight security guard on Oswald."
It is brilliant, biting journalism. She is pointing out the absolute absurdity of the logistics, and she didn't stop at writing opinion pieces.
She used her massive fame to gain access that the FBI couldn't even manage. She attended Jack Ruby's trial in Dallas.
And through her defense contacts, she secured something unprecedented. 2 private, closed-door, one-on-one interviews with Jack Ruby.
We don't have transcripts of those interviews, but the physical description she provided of Ruby is chilling. She wrote that his eyes looked like the glass eyes of a doll.
When they shook hands, she noted that his hand trembled like the heartbeat of a bird.
He's a man who knew he was a dead end. He was terrified. Whatever Jack Ruby told Dorothy Kilgallen in those rooms, it poured gasoline on her investigation.
She was zeroing in on the architecture. She reportedly told friends that the assassination wasn't the work of one man. It was a vast web of people, the CIA mob nexus, who could not afford for the truth to be exposed.
And then she pulls off an absolute journalistic coup.
What?
The Warren Commission, the official government body investigating the assassination, had interviewed Jack Ruby behind closed doors. The transcript was highly classified.
But somehow, Kilgallen obtained a leaked copy of Ruby's testimony before it was officially released.
And she didn't just leak it, she published it in the New York Journal American. She completely embarrassed Chief Justice Earl Warren.
She meticulously analyzed the transcript, pointing out how the commission fed Ruby leading questions and intentionally failed to ask him the most obvious, pressing questions about his underworld connections.
The FBI was furious. They demanded she reveal her source.
And she stood her ground, vowing, "I'd rather die than reveal the source."
She was compiling all of this evidence into a massive dossier. Following the national scandal of the JFK assassination and her Warren Commission leaks, she was drafting a book.
She had a working title for the section on Ruby in Dallas, Murder One.
She was telling friends, she told her lawyers, "I'm going to break the real story. I'm going to have the biggest scoop of the century."
But the public never got to read Murder One. On the morning of November 8, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse.
The official medical examiner's ruling was a fatal, accidental combination of barbiturates and alcohol.
Another overdose. It is the exact same forensic signature as Marilyn Monroe. But the circumstances of Kilgallen's death are wildly suspicious.
First of all, she was found in a guest bedroom she never slept in, wearing clothes she wouldn't wear to bed, with her makeup still perfectly applied.
And most importantly, the massive file, the Murder One draft, the notes from her interviews with Jack Ruby, the evidence of the CIA mob connection, it completely vanished from her home. It has never been found.
The timeline of her final hours only deepens the mystery. One of the last people to see her alive was a woman named Catherine Stone, an acquaintance from her television work.
Stone reported seeing Kilgallen late that night at the Regency Hotel bar, huddled in deep, hushed conversation with a mystery man.
There has been endless debate about the identity of this mystery man. Investigative reporters later suggested he was an operative connected to New Orleans, specifically tied to the exact mafia figures, like Carlos Marcello, that Kilgallen was investigating.
But whoever he was, Kilgallen went home that night, and by morning, the most dangerous reporter in America was dead, and the physical evidence of the tripartite state was gone.
It is a profound historical tragedy. Kilgallen was closing in on the very pipeline we have spent this hour discussing. She saw how the machinery worked, and the machinery simply eliminated the threat.
So let's step back and look at the entire board. We started this journey in the chaotic, violent streets of the 1930s, watching Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky build a highly structured corporate criminal syndicate.
We saw the United States government realize they needed that syndicate's power during World War II, officially opening the door between the underworld and the overworld.
We then followed that underworld capital to Cuba, where Lansky built a sovereign financial washing machine, completely insulated from U.S. law enforcement by a dictator's decree.
From there, we watched that exact same financial architecture get absorbed and expanded by the intelligence community.
The offshore pipeline Castle Bank, BCCI washing drug money, funding covert proxy wars, and bypassing democratic oversight, all while the CIA killed domestic tax probes to protect the operation.
And finally, we look at the domestic fallout. When that immense hidden machinery felt threatened, it reacted with brutal efficiency.
We saw the unexplained overdose of Marilyn Monroe and the missing Red Book, the daylight execution of Mary Pinchot Meyer and the CIA counterintelligence chief destroying her diary.
And the highly suspicious death of Dorothy Kilgallen, whose Murder One manuscript vanished just as she was about to expose the entire apparatus.
It completely shatters that clean, historical X-ray we talked about at the beginning. We want the history books to tell us the government is in the light and the criminals are in the shadows.
But this 45-year pipeline proves that the underworld isn't always hiding in a dark alley. Sometimes it's sitting on a bank board in the Bahamas or managing a crisis from an office at CIA headquarters.
It absolutely blurs the lines.
It does. And I want to leave you with a final philosophical thought to mull over. We spend so much time in these historical mysteries trying to identify who the bad guys are.
Was it the mob who shot the president? Was it rogue intelligence agents who silenced the witnesses?
But consider the mechanics we've explored today. If a government utilizes the exact same offshore laundering networks to fund its operations and employs the exact same violent assassination tactics to silence its domestic liabilities, at what point does the distinction between a state actor and a syndicate boss completely cease to exist?
That is an incredibly chilling question. When the methods are identical, maybe the labels don't matter anymore. A cartel is a cartel, whether they wear a pinstripe suit or carry a government badge. We invite you to keep questioning the official narratives, to look closer at the anomalies in the record, and to always, always follow the money. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.